Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are continuing with the issue that started off with the sabbatical year, the idea of the sabbatical year being a way to just underscore how we don't own anything, in this particular case, land. We have the use of it, and we have moved on to how we deal with one another. I think some consequences of that particular premise. And we are going to be dealing with the issue of sale of homes now, as opposed to land. And I'm going to start with a screen share. Golda, did you have your hand up? Okay. So there's going to be some differences that if you sell a home and where that home is located. So did we make our bracha? Isn't that amazing?
We did.
Good, thank you. Wow, my brain is just, well, anyway. The ish ki yimkor beit moshav ir choma. And if a man sells a dwelling, a home essentially, beit moshav means a house of dwelling, ir choma, in a walled city, a city with a wall. V'haita geulato, and one may redeem it ad tom, until the end of shnat mimkamor, from the day of its sale, the year of its sale, yamim tie gulato. One shall be able to do that. Its redemption shall be 2 years. 2 years, I believe, is what it is. Yes. Okay. Or a complete year. Let's see. Yeah. Sorry. We're saying that you have 1 year in which to redeem a home that you have sold in a walled city. Remember, we had been talking right before this about the redemption of fields prior to the Jubilee year and how one calculated that. And we had said at the time that if you sell a field, it is for a minimum period of 2 years, possibly 3 harvests. But that you cannot do it for less, that you can't retract the sale or redeem that sale if for less than that amount of time. But here we're saying that, and we'll make sure I have translated this correctly, that you only have, after a certain period of time, in this particular case, there's an outright sale after a year. So, Beit Moshav Ir Choma, a dwelling in a walled city. And in the Sifra again, analyzing this. Bayit betoch ir, he's saying, putting this in simple language, a home in a city, hamukefet choma, which is surrounded by a wall, mimot Yehoshua bin Nun, from the days of Joshua, son of Nun, meaning prior to the conquest of the land of Canaan. So it's interesting that the halacha understands whenever the Torah is talking about a Beit Choma, or rather a Ir Choma, that it understands that the same way, as being from the time, it must have had walls since before the time of, or since the time of Joshua, son of Nun. So it can't be a walled city later than that. The halacha of a walled city does not apply if that wall was constructed later on. There's of course, quite a lot of discussion in the Talmud as to what's really involved. What happens if the wall was there, but it fell down and then it was subsequently rebuilt, etc. How does that affect these particular laws? On a practical level, where it applies even today, has to do with the fact that with Purim, because we have that rule that with Purim, if it is in a city that is if you live in a city that has a wall surrounding it since the time of Joshua, you celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar and not the 14th of Adar. And it's called Shushan Purim because Shushan was a walled city. It would have fit that category. And again, on a practical level, Jerusalem is such a city. So they celebrate Shushan Purim in the city of Jerusalem because it has normal. Yeah.
You're using the word practical, and I would use maybe modern times or today or whatever, because I don't understand the practicality of this at all, of celebrating, Purim on a different day, of having different rules for house sales in walled versus non-walled cities. Do you understand any kind of, is there any, or is this just Hulk and no rationale?
So there is some rationale, and that has to do with Joshua being the one who was the one responsible for the conquest, and he led the battle against the Amalekites under Moses. So there's that reference back to Joshua, because in that first encounter against the Amalekites mentioned in the book of Exodus at the end of Parshat Bashalach, Joshua is the one who has to lead the Israelites in that battle. And when I say practical, I mean practice, that one is actually practicing these laws. We've read a good number of laws which we try to learn values from, but we may not be able to actually put them in practice, such as all those laws of sacrifices, etc., and some of the laws of purity, etc. And we nevertheless have tried to be able to find some practical ways in which to apply the values of those laws. But in this particular case, the law is actually practiced. So that's practical.
But is the reason behind it just to remember Joshua, as like a commemoration or a religious, idea about who Joshua is that we need to remember, as opposed to like any real reason to have different laws for selling a house in a walled versus non-walled city?
I understand. I'm not sure I can answer that question right this moment. We may be able to answer it a little bit better as to why a walled city would be different from a regular unwalled city. And I don't want to anticipate what we're going to learn in a moment, or hopefully in just a little bit. Let's keep going. You'll see why I'm going to say 2 years in this Rashi. But that's the reason for the reference to Joshua. It's a way of honoring him and remembering the role he played in destroying Amalek. And again, what that represents, what the destruction of Amalek represents. Rather, again, than actually going out and killing people who we say, oh, well, they're like today, they're like Amalekites of today, so therefore there's a justification to destroy them. I don't buy that kind of argument. At any rate, and its redemption shall be, and explaining this, these are the words in the Torah, but now Rashi explaining, the fish ne'emar, because with regards to a sadeh, regarding fields, it stated, sheyachol lega'ala mishtei shanim va'elach, because when it comes to fields, it says that he is able to redeem it from 2 years and onwards. Kozman sheyirtzeh, at any point along the line after 2 years. Uvetoch shtei shanim harishonot, but within those first 2 years, eino yachol lega'ala, he is not able to redeem it. Hutzrach lefaresh bazeh. The Torah needed to explain in this case, shehu chiluf, that it's exactly the reverse. Okay, she'im rotzeh legaol b'shana rishona. Okay, that if he wishes to redeem it in the first year, go'ala, he can redeem it. Ula'achar mikan eino ga'ala. But after that point, he cannot redeem it. He has no longer the right of redemption. V'haita ge'ulato, that's again taking the words from the Torah itself, shall buy it. He says that its redemption refers to the redemption of the house. Yamim. So Yamim, of course, we know we would translate Yom as a day, right? but it means Yemei. Days here means Yemei Shana Shlema, when we refer to the days of a complete year, Kruyim Yamim, we refer to them as days. And again, we have another example in Genesis chapter 24. Teshev Hana'ara Itanu Yamim. This is the reference to the story where Eliezer, we believe it's Eliezer, goes back to bring Rebekah back to the land of Canaan to marry Isaac. And I believe it's there that they are saying to him, let her remain with us, Yamim, and they mean for a year. And the context there goes from, I believe, a longer period to a shorter period of time. I mean, that's the way one would tend to bargain in that sense. But Yamim there also means a complete year. So here we go. Ve'im lo yigael ad malot lo shana tamima. But if he does not redeem it until the completion for him of a whole year, of a complete year, v'kam habayit asher ba'ir, then the home, that the house will be that is in the city, asher lo choma, and we read it as lo with a vav, which means which has for it a wall, litzmitut, for in perpetuity, la kone oto l'dorotav, to the one who purchased it for his generations. And the vakam, of course, means it stands, it's established. Lo yetze bayovel, and it makes it very clear, it shall not go out in the Jubilee year. It doesn't return to its original owner in the Jubilee year. So, v'kam habayit, the house will be established, v'gomer, etc., litzmitut, in perpetuity. Yetzei mikocho shel mocher, it will go out from, and I was trying to find a good word, and this may not be the best word to translate it, but it literally means it would go out from being under the jurisdiction of the seller.
Yeah, that's what it says here.
And should, thank you, and should remain in the jurisdiction of the purchaser. So I'm going to change this.
Rabbi, with that Masoretic note about the word lo, changing it from not into it is. I mean, that's kind of, it's like a change from the opposite of what it
I know.
says.
And yes.
I just don't understand. I mean, I guess if they had said it is not in a walled city, it's contradicting what they said before and they need to change it. But I just can't make sense of those kinds of things.
Hopefully, Rashi's going to actually deal with it. And here we are. Asher lo chama, right? Which does not have a wall. Lo karina. We read it as it has, which it has, to it, lo, to it. Amru Razal, so our sages of blessed memory said, Afal pi she'ein lo achshav. So the point about this is that even if it doesn't have a wall now, in other words, if it had walls by the time of Joshua, that's what counts. And even if those walls have been torn down, okay, it still counts. And that's what that law is trying to tell us. Ho'il v'haita lo kodem lachem, since it had a wall prior to that time. It did have a wall. So that's the point of the law. Now, Rashi goes on with a little technical detail here. And this may not be Rashi. It may be actually an editing of the Rashi of this text, and that's why it's in parentheses here. However, it goes on to say, "Ve'ir nekevahi," but it turns out that the word "ir," city, is feminine, right? V'hutzlach lichtov la. It shouldn't have said law, okay, to it masculine. It should have said to it, that is a city, feminine, using the feminine pronoun. Ella, however, he says, mitoch shetzarich lichtov lo bifnim, but because of what it's trying to teach, that is to say that even if it no longer has a wall, but if it did have a wall previously, and it had to say law with an aleph, right? Tiknu lo b'masoret. That is why the tradition wrote it as law masculine. Ze nofel al ze. Why? Because the one word law with a vav sounds like law with an aleph. That's what it's explaining. So this is a circumstantial, this is like almost a little piece of oral law that's put in, because oral law deals with circumstances, and the circumstance is, well, it had a wall before, but it doesn't have a wall now. What do we do? What's the halacha? So you can see the necessity of having something that we would call an oral law. Lo yetze bayovel. It should not go out in the Jubilee year. Amar Rav Safra, said Rav Safra, and this word af even is taken out. Generally, as I said, the parenthesis means that you actually don't read it as part of the original. In paga bo yovel, interesting. If the Jubilee year occurred, betoch shnato, within that year, lo yetze. So he's saying it's that, the strength of that statement that it should not go out in the Jubilee year means that if I sold you a house, this is how I'm understanding this. If I sold you a house in that 49th year, and 6 months later, the Jubilee occurred, okay, at that point, you can't redeem it anymore. It does not go out in the Jubilee year. That's the force of this additional statement that sounds like it's unnecessary. Uvate hachatzerim, but houses that are in the that are in areas, that's how I'm going to, literally a chatzer is a courtyard, okay? And it may mean cities of courtyards. And the reason why it's saying is that we're talking about houses that surround a courtyard. And that's discussed greatly in the Talmud, that was the way they built their homes, is they would build homes to surround a courtyard. And then there'd be a common entrance that would go out to an alleyway. Asher ein lahem choma saviv, but they do not have this wall surrounding them. In other words, it's an open city. Al sdei, according to the field, haaretz yechashev, it should be considered just like the fields of the land. It should be considered just like the open fields. Geula tielo, it in fact does have a redemption. It has that redemption time that it has, of the fields have, uvayovel yetze, and in the Jubilee year, it goes back to the original owner. Let's see what Rashi has to say. Uvatze hachatzerim. So he says, ketargumo petzachya. So petzachya means open, right? That they're open. So he says, just as the Targum translates it translates chatzerim as petzachya, even though chatzer usually means a courtyard, right? He says ayarot petuchot. He means open cities, me'ein choma, that do not have a wall. Ve'yesh harbe b'sefer Yehoshua, and there are many examples in the book of Joshua, gives the chapter here, ha'arim v'chatzreihem, the cities and their chatzreihem, and I think it means the open ones. And he gives, again, in Genesis chapter 25, it says, the chatzreihem uvetirotam. So I believe, again, it means in their open cities here. And in there, I think a tirot Lauren, if you have the translation, I thought it meant palaces or something like.
It just here says in their open cities and in their walled cities.
Oh,
But you
really?
may be right, but it just
No,
says
it's
walled.
good. I'll put that down. Okay, sounds good. Oops, sorry. I have to do this again. Let's see here. Hold on a second here. Oh boy. It does make sense given the context. Thank you. Al Sadeh, Haaretz Yechashev, right? Literally, it means on the fields of the land, they shall be calculated or they should be considered. Hare hein kesadot. He says, indeed, they are like fields. Hanigalim ad hayovel, which can be redeemed up until the Jubilee year. Veyotzin bayovel leva'alim, and in the Jubilee year, they return to the original owners. Im lo nigalu, if they were not redeemed. So essentially, you're renting. Again, you're paying for the use of the home. Geula tielo, right? It shall have a redemption. Miyad im yitzeh. And interesting though, here it's saying here, if I'm understanding again correctly, okay, yeah, it means it can be redeemed immediately. Miyad means immediately, im yitzeh, if he wishes. So, renting homes essentially like this, purchasing homes in this particular way, it's a very interesting law, and trying to understand all the implications of this. And given the nature of our current real estate market, it certainly makes one want to think about it. But I can see pros and cons. Uvazeh yofeh kochoa. And in this sense, right, because it can be redeemed immediately, it is more effective, mikoach sadot, from the literally koach means the power of fields, and it means the power of redemption, I believe, is what it's suggesting here, that the power of redemption is stronger than the power of redemption regarding fields. Shehasadot ein nigalot ad shtei shanim, because fields cannot be redeemed until 2 years have passed. Uvayovel yetzeh, and in the Jubilee year, it should go out, bechinam, for nothing. In other words, he doesn't have to pay back the renter, the person who's rented the home. Let's see. Let's stop here, because it turns out that there's an exception to this rule, and that has to do with cities that belong to Levites, and homes that belong to Levites.
Mine has more on that last Rashi than that. Does yours stop there? Oh, I see. The Hebrew stops there. Mine has this little longer English stuff.
Right. Is there anything you want to add in terms of the English?
Well, I guess it's mostly parenthetical then, just
Yeah.
real long.
Okay. If people feel they need an additional explanation, I'm happy for you to share it.
Yeah, I don't know if it adds or not.
Okay. All right. Well, are there any questions here about this? And I'm going to stop the share here. Oh, also see if I can put in a bookmark.
It's just uber complicated.
Well,
And you need lawyers and other things to make sure you do it right, I guess, or at
well,
least rabbinic scholars.
okay, so this would only take place within a bet din. In other words, it's
Right.
all these transactions are done within the jurisdiction of a bet din to make sure that the documents are accurate, that this is all being done properly. And of course, we're just skirting the tip of of this whole subject. in terms of the practicalities of it. But at least it gives you some idea of real estate law in the Torah.
Yep.
And again, my feeling is that what it's trying to do in making these laws and the way and it's trying to stabilize ownership. Well, it isn't ownership, but to stabilize the economy in that sense, that you don't start getting people who are fabulously wealthy and people who are extraordinarily poor. You know, how well it works, that's another, it still ultimately depends on, you know, how you go at this and with what heart you go at this. But I feel that that's what's underneath all of this, is trying to see if there's some way to stabilize people's livelihoods and the economy in general. So we'll stop with that. And we'll meet tomorrow, God willing, and discuss the exception of the Levites.